Hi, good evening. My name is Joseph Mello, Director and Curator of the Galleries at the Herron School of Art and Design. I forgot, I can actually take this off while I'm right here. I'm so pleased to see friends, colleagues, and students in the audience tonight, and to those who are joining us virtually, welcome. We are collectively thrilled for the opportunity to have one of the leading arts writers and critics, Eleanor McCartney, speak on the work of John Buck. Eleanor's talk that will stream shortly from New York City is the 2021 Carrie Deneen and Samuel Sutphin Visiting Artist Lecture. I want to thank both Carrie and Sam for their support that made this talk possible. Each of them have been longtime friends of Herron and are active in the Indianapolis arts community. Thank you both. John Buck, prints and sculpture from the collections of the Jordan D. Schnitzer and his family foundation, was organized by Jordan Schnitzer Family Foundation in the Hallie Ford Museum of Art and has been supported in part by Jordan D. Schnitzer and again, his family foundation. It seems a little repetitive, I'm sorry. My thanks go out to Jordan for his remarkable generosity for sharing his collections with us here today. I would also like to thank the foundation for their gift of 72 of these monographs that, by the way, are for sale just outside the talk this evening and certainly after the talk, that accompany the 2008 national tour of John's work drawn from the Schnitzer Family Foundation. Students, I want to mention, especially to faculty who are in the audience here tonight and also on Zoom, that students participating in gallery engagements this spring will each receive a copy of the catalog at no cost. Speaking of the Schnitzer Foundation, I also want to offer my sincere thanks to William Morrow, who directs their exhibition program, for the countless hours he spent on the project. Thank you so much, William. Before I introduce this evening's speaker, again, I want to announce that American Abstract Artists, Digital Prints 2012 to 2019 is also opening this evening. Organized by the Ewing Gallery of Art at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, this exhibition is supported by a generous grant from the Creative Motif Fund, New York. All of our galleries will remain open following this evening's program. Looking forward to February 9th, David Hicks' figural narratives will be on view in the Basile Gallery and feature a selection of large-scale drawings and sculptural works by this Cleveland-based artist. Really a remarkable exhibit. You really don't want to miss it. Speaking of exhibitions, I would like to bring to your attention that all of our exhibitions can be viewed remotely via virtual tours found on Herron's webpage. These VRs were produced in partnership with the University Information Technology Services Research Technologies IU 3D initiative at Indiana University and made possible by an anonymous donor. And of patrons, I want to note that free parking this academic year, again, for our exhibition and speakers committee, exhibition and speakers programs have been generously provided by the Great Frame Up in its 4 locations in and around Indianapolis. I also want to thank Sun King Brewery for supplying craft beer for our receptions this year. And I honestly hope that before too long, we can actually have a reception with beer and hopefully wine too as well. So stay tuned. For anyone that parked in the garage tonight, you can pick up this little slip of paper, which is out on the table. It has a code. You basically come up to the parking thing, punch in the code, the gate opens, and out you go. So don't reuse that card that was issued to you when you came into the garage, like I've done before and wondered why the code didn't work. Last, but really far from least, I want to thank my new team at the galleries, April Nauber and Cassie Woodworth. Both hit the ground running late last year and continue to be an integral part of all we do here at the galleries. Thank you, April and Cassie. I also want to thank and recognize our new intern, Peyton Healy, our graduate fellow, Farnaz Faruqi, as well as our work study crew comprised of Veronica Breach, Ian Harmon, Jane Kim, Jalen Lauder, Ty Pondexter, and Haley Yonkin. My thanks to each of you. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, Eleanor Heartney. Eleanor Heartney is a contributing editor for Art in America, Art Press, and has written extensively for other publications, including Art News, the New Art Examiner, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. She is the author of many noteworthy books, including Critical Condition, American Culture at the Crossroads, Art and Today, Postmodernism, Postmodern Heretics, the Catholic Imagination, in Contemporary Art, and Doomsday Dreams, the Apocalyptic Imagination in Contemporary Art. She is the co-author of the award-winning books After the Revolution, Women Who Transformed Contemporary Art, and The Reckoning, Women Artists in the New Millennium. The recipient of the College Art Association's Frank Jewett Mather Award for Distinction in Art Criticism, Heartney is also past president of the AICA USA, the American section of the International Art Critics Association. Heartney has lectured extensively at universities and institutions in America and abroad. They include Dartmouth College, Skidmore College, Middlebury College, Massachusetts College of Art, Taipei Cultural Center, Korean University, the Public Art Fund of New York City, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia, and the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, both coasts. She has taught at RISD, Bard College, Tyler School of Art, the Parsons School of Design, Montclair State University, the University of New Mexico, and Hunter College in New York City. In her talk tonight, John Buck, American Seer, Eleanor will posit such questions as, what is America's essence? Have we lived up to our ideals? Eleanor will suggest that as such questions roil our political culture, Montana-based artist John Buck explores through his practice the concept of America as a work in progress. Please join me in welcoming Eleanor Heartney.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joseph. And
stop this. There you are.
Right. Here I am. Thank you very much. And I'm really sorry I can't be there in person. I was looking forward to it actually, but Omicron, of course, had other ideas. So I'm coming to you from my apartment in New York City. But it's one of the wonders of modern technology, which means that we can all come together despite these difficulties. So as Joseph was saying, John Buck is an amazing artist who actually born in Iowa, as was I, but has lived since 1976 in Bozeman, Montana, while also spending about half a year in Hawaii. And I think that these two geographic locations have had a big impact on his art and his thinking, as we shall see. And there are many things that could be said about his work. He's a master woodworker. He, as if you've seen the exhibition, he makes woodcuts that are technologically incredible, you know, that very few people could master. He does really remarkable sculptures, and they deal with a wide variety of themes. But what I want to talk about today is to sort of narrow down and look at the focus of the way that he talks about America, because I think it's something that's very relevant to our current moment. So I want to start here. Let me get a share the screen here. Okay, just a moment, and we will bring it up. Okay, there we go. Yay. I want to start with this work, American Eagle, The Great Divide from 1992, because this work, as I think all of the work that I'm going to be showing tonight, is talking about sort of the contradictions between our ideals as Americans and the contradictions and difficulties that we face. And this work in particular, of course, all of his works, his woodcuts have this format in which you have a sort of basic central image, and then it's surrounded in the background by these very finely drawn little narratives, so that it becomes a kind of story. He's a real storyteller. And in this case here, we see the very proud American eagle which is
Excuse me,
Yes.
Eleanor, you're not sharing the screen right now. Could you
Oh,
check
I'm not.
Yeah, could you check your setting again? The
Okay, sure.
little green button at the bottom.
Yes, yes. Okay. Hang on just a second.
Sure.
Right. I thought I was, but I was not. Okay. Screen share. Share. Okay.
You had it there for a second.
Okay, just a moment.
Take your time.
Okay, I know these technologies here. Okay.
Yeah, you are sharing the screen. You just need to.
And there we go.
There we
Okay,
are.
good.
Yay.
Okay, we got the
All good.
screen.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, very good. All right. So this work, American Eagle, The Great Divide, seems to me a great way to kind of introduce the themes that I want to talk about today. So we see here the proud American eagle, which of course is a symbol of strength and freedom, proudly sitting on this branch. And yet, if we look behind, we see that there are these images which tell a different kind of story. This particular story, as I said, Buck is really a storyteller, is a narrative about the environmental costs of our appetite for energy. So we see here things like you see a kind of rippling highway that's clogged with cars. You see factories belching smoke. You see urban skylines. You see oil derricks. You see nuclear cooling towers. You see denuded forests. You see hydroelectric dams. And so one of the things that this work is talking about is the contradiction between our very benign self-image and then our self-destructive appetites. And this is, I'm going to argue, is really the recurring theme in a lot of Buck's work. He wants to talk about how difficult it is to reconcile our pastoral utopian ideals with the reality, which includes conflict, urbanization, power, and militarism. And of course, this question of what does it mean to be an American today? What is America? Is very pressing for all of us in these very divided and polarized time. And I think that I would argue, and I think it seems indisputable, that our sense of American identity is shaped by the kinds of stories that we tell ourselves, by our national myths, by our national literature, and of course, our national art. And I want to just outline what I see as a few of these stories that are addressed in Buck's work. First of all, of course, is the story we tell ourselves about America and nature, the American landscape, which was seen certainly in the 19th century and even before that as the New Eden, this beautiful place, this unspoiled place that was discovered and then was opened up by the brave people who came to settle America. And this is the story that is told by Thoreau at Walden. It's the story also of Huck Finn lighting out for the territories, the notion that however terrible things are happening, you can always gain freedom by escaping into that American landscape. So this is one of our, I think, really very American stories. Another very American story is the notion of America as a land of self-invention, individualism, and as a nation of immigrants who come here to better themselves. And of course, this is the story that we find in Great Gatsby, for example. It's the story that was told by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who talked about the idea that America is another name for opportunities. So this is, I think, also a very important part of our psyche and our identity as Americans. A third story that we tell ourselves is about the idea of America as a place where it is not only possible, but often kind of very much important to resist authority. This notion that dissent is the highest form of patriotism. And of course, this is deeply ingrained in our history. It goes back to the Tea Party, of course, the Boston Tea Party. It runs through the civil rights and Vietnam protests. And now it plays out over the COVID restrictions. So this idea that we as Americans must have freedom, and freedom is about standing up to our authorities. And the fourth mythology, or the fourth, I guess, story that we tell ourselves about America is what's been called American exceptionalism. This is the idea that America is different from other countries, that it should lead as an example. It leads the world to freedom, that it was a special place founded for a special reason, and that we find our meaning in our faith in progress, that we are that special city on a hill. And so these are stories that I think are deeply ingrained in the American psyche, and they're important to us. And they've been responsible, I think, for many good things, but there's a flip side to these stories as well. So, for example, the frontier mentality that I'm talking about is one that also encourages environmental destruction. The myth that America was just open land aids the decimation of indigenous people. So it has also created a certain stain on our history. And in a similar way, the story that we tell ourselves about individualism is one that can also lead to greed, destruction of community, and the kind of polarizing politics that we have today. And similarly, the idea of exceptionalism, that we are special, can lead to imperialisms, to the notion that America first, that we don't have to care what the rest of the world thinks, that we should only take care of ourselves. Now, I would argue that Buck deals with all of these contradictions. He talks about not only the good things, the good sides of the stories that we tell ourselves, but also the other side as well. And that's why his works are so complex. He chooses to tell his story through vernacular American styles and motifs. And as we can see here, that there is a kind of 19th century quality, not only to the medium that he's chosen here, woodcuts, or as we will see also wood sculptures, but also in the kinds of images that he uses to express his ideas. So what I want to do now is, just before we go more deeply into the work, is to talk about some of his visual sources. So, for example, not only in the woodcuts, but also in the sculptures, there's an homage to that kind of American tradition of whittling. This, of course, was once a common skill. It was said that when a boy came of age, the first thing that happened was he got a knife so that he could whittle. There are stories about during the Civil War that around the campfire, this is what the soldiers did to while away their time. And then after the war was over, they came back home and brought these skills with them. So this notion of whittling is very important, the notion of wood. And as we'll see as we go through the work, the idea of wood is very important to Buck, not only as a material and a medium, but really as a subject as well. So here I'm illustrating that here with this carving of an American eagle. And again, in the same sort of spirit as the eagle that we just saw in the previous image. And I think another source of inspiration for him is, in fact, tattoos here. And this is just a cover of a book of various kind of 19th century American motifs. And if you look closely here, you will see that many of the motifs here, the eagle, the skull, the ship, the flag, the hand, will recur in Buck's work. So again, this is part of our sense of kind of who we are, our American popular culture especially back in the 19th century. And another source for his work, and again, a source for the image that we just saw by him, is, of course, John James Audubon's Birds of America. And this goes back again to the idea of sort of America and its special connection and relationship to nature. But I want to draw your attention also here in this image to this kind of much less benign picture of the American eagle, which is, of course, our national symbol here as it rips apart this catfish. So even for Audubon, there was something kind of problematic about this notion of the American eagle as our symbol of our country. Other sources that I think are important to Buck are the wood engravings that were used in 19th century illustrated papers. Now, these were papers that sort of told the news of the day and did them through wood engravings and wood cuts. and so that they could be widely distributed. And again, there's this kind of very populist aspect to Buck's work, which I think comes out of also the Illustrated Weekly, the idea that these are images and ideas that can be widely distributed, that this is speaking to the mass of people. This is not an elite art form. And that's true of woodcuts as well. And another source, as we shall see in a lot of the works, is the Day of the Dead, particularly the images of the Day of the Dead by Jose Guadalupe Posada, who is a Mexican artist. Here we're going a little bit beyond America, our contiguous states, and into kind of North America and the Americas. But this idea of the Day of the Dead, these skeletons who become, they serve many functions. Of course, partly they're talking about, kind of the fact that in life we are in death, but also as they were used by someone like Posada, they serve to create sort of these satirical commentaries on the world today. And you'll see that this is also something that Buck has picked up, that the skeleton becomes a kind of everyman in a way, who stands in for some of our greatest dilemmas. And another source for Buck is, and we'll see that he uses it specifically in a couple of works, is the scrimshaw carving. Now, this is something kind of like whittling. This was a skill. This was a kind of craft that was pursued by sailors at sea. Their long months at sea, to create these kind of drawings that were carved into whale's bones and whale's teeth. So, and you can see here again a lot of these similar images that the ship, the eagle, that these became again ways to kind of impress their sense of who they were as Americans as they traveled around the world. And also kind of dealing with this idea of what is America traveling around the world, the ship in a bottle. And we'll see that, again, Buck uses this in a very inventive way. These, of course, are these sort of seemingly magical pieces of sculpture, which are meticulously built inside of a bottle, and the ship here raised so that, of course, it could never come out of the bottle. So there's an interesting contradiction about inside and outside that Buck exploits in his work. So what I want to turn to now is the idea that he has used all of these kinds of nostalgic styles in a way to reverberate against the very contemporary themes that he's dealing with. So that what he's doing is suggesting that our current problems are rooted in older ideas. And as I mentioned before, there is a format to all of the woodcuts here, a central image surrounded by these sort of smaller background images. So kind of like a theme and commentary, and that's how I'm going to read them. Although I should say that, these are kind of very, they're very multi-faceted drawings and linear drawings here. And this is simply one interpretation that I'm putting on them. And one of the things that Buck encourages everyone to do is, in fact, to address these works, to look at them closely, and to create your own narratives as well. But this is, at any rate, how I see the work. So this is a work called The Times from 1991. And this work, like many of his works, are direct or indirect commentaries on news events. In this particular case, this was, of course, the late 80s and early 90s, was a time of tremendous change in America, a time in some ways not unlike our own. This was a time that saw the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fall of the Soviet Union, the first Gulf Wars. There was a sense that Buck is expressing here of the world literally going up in flames. And you see here this central image of the fire. And it's going up in flames over a heap of rolled up newspapers. And of course, that talks about the way in which he was getting his news at the time through the newspapers. Now, behind this is a background that is full of kind of very intricate images. And we can make out things like a death head, skulls here. We see leafless trees, severed bodies, various religious symbols, and then surrounded by the moths. And again, moths we will see as a recurring theme. A number of these are recurring themes, but the idea being here that that the world here is very complex, and that the news that is bringing this forward to us is not necessarily telling us the entire complexity of the situation that we're dealing with. At this time, and I'm going to show first some of the kind of works from the 80s and then move forward in time. In the 80s, particularly, a lot of Buck's work dealt with international events. These are things that were pressing on him, I think, in many ways. And so this is another one, Beirut, or excuse me, East-West from 1988, but which has, I think, a very contemporary message, because again, it's talking about the importance of international cooperation. In our current parlance, we could say that it really is an argument against the idea of America first. And it's presented here, as we can see it, there's a globe, there's a figure, that iconic figure in the middle of the globe, and it's surrounded by various symbols of Eastern and Western culture. One can make out, for example, a Buddha figure. There's also another skeleton here. There is a figure that has sort of many heads, which has a kind of almost Hindu quality, but of course, each of the heads have sprouted these arms, which are holding different kinds of tools. And that seems to have a kind of very sort of down-home American resonance. And I also want to draw your attention in particular to that blue vase. You see the blue vase down at the bottom, which is, one of those kind of rebus images, because of course, if you see the vase as the foreground, then you see a vase, but you can also see it as a negative space. And then you see that there's an outline of two faces that are facing each other. And again, sort of going back to this idea of cooperation, of the fact that if we face each other and we need to deal with each other, we need to cooperate with each other. This is another one of the more internationally oriented works, Beirut from 1983. And this work, Buck says, has told us, is inspired by a news report that he got that in Lebanon during the war, that soldiers were using the ancient cedars for target practice. And his work, of course, and his sense of landscape, of nature, and of wood, this sort of cut him to the quick. You'll see that this image of the tree, this kind of leafless tree, recurs frequently in the work, and as a kind of, I think, as a stand-in for, not only for sort of environmental destruction, which this act of the soldiers spoke about, but also I think that sort of the loss of our sense of who we are, that the tree of life that becomes a kind of tree of death. And again, behind it, there are a variety of symbols, and we can make out various things here, architectural and human figures, religious and other symbols that talk again, it seems, about the idea of mingling of cultures. And another more internationally oriented work, this is Crossroads, which was dealing with South Africa's system of apartheid. This was, of course, back in the days when South Africa was still, this was still the rule in South Africa. And here you see the central image now is a flame. It's similar to the fire that we saw earlier in that earlier work with the newspapers. But here the flame covers a field, and inside of it, we see the contrasting reality of South Africa at the time. On the one hand, you see that the workers who are confined to shanty towns outside the city, and then you see all of these skyscrapers, this booming metropolis that their labor supports. There are African and non-African heads here. So it's talking about this again, this sort of basic contradiction, because contradiction is very much, I think, the theme in almost all of Buck's work. Now, this idea also of the flame and the fire, which we've seen already now in 2 works, is a recurring theme, and it has shifting meanings, as we can see when we jump forward to this later work from the 2000s. And here, the idea of light and flame, it has a much more positive connotation. Now, I want to point out here too that we've jumped ahead, like a decade. And one of the things that you can see is how much more complex the work has become, the drawings. I mean, there's been a very interesting development in Buck's work, and you'll see that in a lot of the other pieces that I'm going to be showing as well. But now this piece, called The Luminary, was basically created as an homage to the city of Chicago and to a friend who lived there. And to me, it recalls Carl Sandburg's famous poem about Chicago as the city of broad shoulders. It's a very kind of positive image in a way. You see that there's this central figure, which is illuminated by these light bulbs. And behind it are all of these images that celebrate America as a land of technology and innovation. And if you know Chicago, you'll recognize many of these buildings and actually moments from Chicago history. So this work seems to suggest a kind of metaphor for the idea of technology and progress as inspiration and hope. And it's a message, I think, that is contrasts very much with an earlier work, which has a very similar format, this work called Skyline from 2002. And here again, we have a central figure, but here the figure has sort of turned into this skyscraper. And there's something that seems to feel very kind of dehumanizing and mechanical now about the figure that we see. And here, it seems to have a very different vision of the notion of urban development. In the background, again, if you can make them out, there are a whole raft of images that seem much less positive. There's, for example, there's a man who is riding on a cannon with bombs. There's a skeleton in a boat, which recalls the notion of the dead going on the river Styx to the other side. There's references to money lust. There's a kind of ribbon here of dollar signs. There's also kind of images that suggest the idea of workers as machines. And also, and I find this very interesting, there are some art world references, and we find this again throughout in a lot of Buck's work. So if you can make it out on the lower right-hand side, there's a picture here, there's a drawing that suggests an artist with a palette who is writing on Robert Rauschenberg's goat, a famous work by Robert Rauschenberg with a goat coming through a tire. And he's holding an American flag, which seems to me a kind of reference to Jasper Johns as well, another, kind of very famous artist. And yet the flag here has been altered so that there are dollar signs for stars. So in a way, one might be able to read this. And as I say, some of these are my personal interpretations, but as a kind of commentary on what has happened to the art world, as well as to the kind of larger culture, the idea of of money becoming the kind of overall and most important overriding concern of every field of endeavor in America. Now, as I was saying, the kind of idea of light and flames has a shifting meaning in Buck's work. And this work here refers to the fact, first of all, and many of the works have references to his personal life, to the fact that he is a butterfly collector, and he's fascinated by the beauties of moths and butterflies. But this work also, I think, has to do with the idea of this kind of connection between beauty and death, because of course, this here represents a moth, and the moth is drawn to the light, and in being drawn to light is drawn to its death. And so there's a kind of, it's a beautiful, but if you're a butterfly collector, of course, you kill the moth. So the beauty becomes inseparable from the death. And these sort of death images and death references are visible as well in the drawings underneath. In the foreground, of course, we see the Pentagon. But then up above, we see the Temple of Nineveh, which is the capital of the ancient Assyrian Empire, which of course is now in ruins. So in a sense, this work feels like it's offering a kind of cautionary image, a cautionary message here about empires, about militarism, about where, kind of our willingness to unleash war around the world may lead us. And another work that deals with this idea of light. And also, I think, about beauty and death. And this one, the central image, the lamp, is inspired by the experience that Buck had, and I think many of us have had, as certainly I did as a child, of collecting fireflies and collecting them in a jar, these beautiful sort of flickering lights. And then, of course, the next morning, you wake up and you find that they're all dead at the bottom of the jar. And so again, it's magical. There's this sort of magical notion of the light coming from these fireflies, but also that in trying to capture it, then you also destroy it. And again, the background images sort of have a kind of darker connotation. You can see here, let's see, there's an image here of the Statue of Liberty raising her lamp. And you'll see that, in many of these images, many of these works, the Statue of Liberty recurs, and again, has kind of shifting meanings. But in this case, sort of, I think, talking about our ideals, what we want to be as America, what we want to be a light to the world, again, bringing that idea of light as this work itself, the name of it, lamp. There is also down on the far right at the bottom, a wishing well. So this seems to talk as well about sort of our hopes for the future. There's a Madonna and child on the other side. Again, a kind of very positive sort of image. But then if you look further, there are images that are much darker. There's a Klansman. There's a kind of very sinister looking devil up here on the upper right. There's belching factories. There are maps of the USSR and China. Of course, our adversaries in the United States. There's a atomic symbol in a circle of bombs. And again, the atomic symbol recurs a lot too, which I think is also an image that talks about kind of our potential for self-destruction and the dangers of nuclear proliferation. So it's a work that, on the one hand, it's about this kind of beautiful, magical image, but then this sort of dark underside as well. And in that sense is very much, I think, typical of the contradictions that Buck wants us to think about. Going back a little bit in time, here is a work called Trails Plowed Under. And this one Buck created specifically to talk about the issue of immigration. Now, again, you see the Statue of Liberty here in the background and holding up her lamp. And yet the question this work seems to be asking is, are we still, are we still welcoming to immigrants? You see the symbols of North and South America here. You see the giant thistle in the foreground, which suggests the borderlands, where, of course, as we know now, there's a great deal of contention. There are palm trees at the bottom. There's a figure on the upper right that seems to be split in half. And again, it suggests perhaps the divided identity of the immigrant. So again, a kind of an image that talks about both our ideals and, kind of asks whether or not we are really living up to them. This is a work that from a decade later, but which has a very similar message. Heart Mountain, Wyoming was a Japanese internment camp in the Second World War. And here, this work, which was inspired by friends of Buck's whose parents were held in these internment camps. They were during the war simply because they were Japanese. They sort of were taken away from their homes. Everything was taken away from them, and they had to live out the war in the internment camp because of the danger that they were felt to pose to our war effort. So here, Heart Mountain becomes Mount Fuji. And this work is very much about a kind of blending of Japanese culture with images of the old and new West. So you've got cowboys here, you've got oil wells, you've also got Buddhas and koi fish, and there's a dragon curling around in the right at the dead center of this image, a Japanese dragon. So it's about the enmeshing of cultures, and it has ultimately, I think, a hopeful message here, in that the central image is a ginkgo tree, and it's often said, of course, that the ginkgo tree is the one tree that will live and come back first if, in fact, we have a nuclear holocaust that destroys everything else. And here the ginkgo tree is rising from an old tire. Again, maybe that Rosenquist or that Rauschenberg reference. But here it seems to represent the idea of triumph over adversity. So again, this idea of America as a land of immigrants, and the importance of nurturing that, because that is where so much of our strength comes from as a nation. The wreath deals with a different kind of, I guess, threat to our American life, our American identity, and that is, of course, the environmental threat. So here, this is a work, and he's done a number of woodcuts that take place in a bottle like this, and I want to remind you of that image that I showed earlier of the ship in a bottle. And so this is kind of very much, kind of taking that theme, but talking about sort of what the inside and the outside. So here, what you have, of course, is an image of a skyline, which is slowly being engulfed by water. So talking about the rising sea waters, and below we see a coral reef, which is littered with sort of the debris of civilization. There's bottles, there's a telephone, there's light bulbs, etc. But again, there's a kind of hopeful aspect to this, in the sense that coral reefs like this, that we know that they're dying in many parts of the world, partly because of global warming, but they're also quite capable of reconstituting themselves. And in this case, as he's suggesting here, kind of using our own debris, growing, our own garbage, all the things that we've thrown into the ocean, then become their new home and their new habitat. So the idea that perhaps, even if our civilization goes, that nature will be able to regenerate itself. And another work that deals with this threat of environmental destruction, which is something that's so much on our minds. And this, of course, work is back in 1994, and it has only become more pressing. So here's a conch shell. And of course, this again goes back to that kind of childhood experience of finding a conch shell, holding it up to your ear and hearing what you think is, or what seems to be, the sound of the sea. And it's a kind of very magical experience. But here, the sound of the sea, as we can see from all of the images in the background, is something that's much more unhappy. It's not the happy sound of the sea, because what you have here are all these images of skeletons who are also blowing conch shells next to belching factories. And again, as I had mentioned, this notion of the Day of the Dead, and the idea of using these skeletons as a kind of satiric commentary on our own culture, on the culture of the living. So here, the sound of the sea, and of course we notice that the conch shell is black, and it's up above the surface of the water, which Buck points out that only happens if the conch is dead, and then the shell rises to the surface. So it's a thing that talks about, that the possible death knell of our environment. So it's a work that it is a warning, basically offering a warning to what may happen if we don't pay more attention and do something about this kind of ever increasing environmental crisis. This is a work that turns to a different kind of issue. In this case, it's a feminist message. And just as the last one was sort of, I think, very prescient about our current ecological concerns, this work is prescient about our current sense of Me Too, the Me Too culture, because this work done back in 1996, as you can see, it deals with, if you look at the sort of images in the background, images of women in their different kinds of roles. There's as a mother, as a cook, as a sex object jumping from a cake. You see that on the upper right. Playboy bunny. There's a Lady Godiva here. These kind of restricting, objectifying roles of women. And then the central image, of course, is this kind of wire-like cage in the form of a woman. And then in the middle, of course, is this bird. And the title directs us to think about the whole story of the notion of the canary in the coal mine. And that, of course, is the idea that in the coal mines, they would set a canary forth. And if the canary died, then they knew that they were in danger and they had to get out of there. So it's a kind of warning system in a way. So here, this is a work that's also talking about these kind of the issues of kind of women and their place in the world, and the need to be much more cognizant of the kinds of inequalities that run rife through our society. This work it deals with the issue of religion and the mixing of politics and religion. And it's called Phoenix Rising. And of course, the phoenix was a bird which in Greek mythology, it was the bird which supposedly was resurrected. It burned and then it came back to life. But instead of showing us a phoenix, what he's showing us is a dodo. And a dodo, of course, is a now extinct bird. And so it seems to be contradicting the title and the central image, sort of this kind of contradictory notion. Will the phoenix rise, or in fact, will it die? Now, surrounding it are many images that come from various civic and religious edifices. You can see, for example, there's a country church, there's the US Capitol building, there are mosques, there's the Tower of Babel. And this, again, is a recurring theme, a recurring motif in a lot of Buck's work. And it talks about, again, our inability to communicate across cultures, going back to that biblical tower, which was built and then destroyed, leaving people unable to communicate with each other. There are swarms of people on the lower register here, pictures of the secular and religious armies that are being mobilized by different ideologies. So what he's really talking about here is that when religion gets mobilized in the service of politics, then it leads to these very terrible consequences. And again, a kind of warning image here. Argosy. This goes back again to a mythological story. In this case, the 100-eyed Argus of Greek mythology, which now has been transformed into a potato with many eyes, as we can see here in a bottle. Now, the Argus had many meanings. One of them was kind of the word itself means bounty. And so it was a kind of positive thing. But here I think that Buck is reinterpreting it in terms of the notion of surveillance. We can see here sort of the many eyes, big brother is watching. There's something kind of very unsettling about it. And that interpretation is reinforced if we look at the background images, which are full of kind of, again, very sort of satirical and unsettling images. There's a Statue of Liberty again, but here she's rising from a shopping cart that's pushed by a shrouded figure of death. So you can see her on the kind of lower, sort of middle right side. There is a blindfolded Mickey Mouse who's holding a money bag. There's the blind symbol of justice who he seems to be mocking. There's Bambi pulling a cart with various emblems of American power. Again, the Capitol building, the Pentagon, the Washington Monument. There's a slumped figure down at the bottom with a sign that reads, "Will work for food," while another figure eats from a garbage can. And there are burning books. So again, the idea is here, I mean, the many-eyed Argosy sees the many aspects of American culture, which are sadly leading us in the wrong direction. The empty hand is it's a term that's used in karate. And again, this comes from Buck's personal life, his own personal experiences. He has also, it practices karate. And what it means in karate is to engage without weapons. So here I'm reading this as a kind of reflection on militarism. Again, there's a central image, with these two hands that seem to be trying to reach each other, and these ripples of water. And behind we see again the Statue of Liberty. We see is on tires surrounded by factories, various other dystopian images, the atom again, a suicide bomber, burning churches. There's on the lower left side, a cornucopia filled with bones. And so seeming to talk about, okay, if we, instead of engaging without weapons, we are engaging with weapons, and these are the possible consequences. And the last of the woodcuts that I want to talk about is this one, the war eagle, kind of bringing us back again to that image of the eagle that we started with. And here, this work was created in 2010 and was a commentary on the conflicts and cultural upheaval in the Middle East at the time of Arab Spring. So Arab Spring was a kind of moment of hope, although it seems to have collapsed since then. And here Buck presents the American eagle, and he notes that he intentionally created it a bit like a drone, but it's followed by swallows, who are symbols of peace. And it's full of all of the kind of new Middle East that's been fueled by oil, the skyscrapers, the mosques, the signs of wealth. But there are also soldiers from past and present. And so if the work is a kind of equivocal message of the hope for peace at the time of Arab Spring. Again, I think full of all of the contradictions of our hopes and our fears for what the world might become. Now, what I want to turn to now quickly are some of the sculptures, because as well as doing these remarkable woodcuts, he is also an amazing sculptor. And the sculptures use many of the same motifs, but they're much less narrative and more personal, as we'll see. So just to quickly kind of, some of these are, I think, also in the exhibition. Here, this one, the inside, again, returning to that ship in the bottle motif. And you see here these little sculptures that are piled inside the bottle, and natural and human-made objects sort of mingling together, kind of this kind of, again, sort of impossible. Part of it is sort of, I think, the impossibleness of the notion of the bottle being able to contain all of these contrasting things. This is also a kind of earlier work, 9/4 Circle, which is the name of a dude ranch. And it's also, I think, the work itself, and that there's often sort of these sort of mysterious references in the sculptures in particular. But it seems to me that this one also is very much a kind of autobiographical image, in the sense that it's a reference to art, and particularly to the art of woodworking, which is so important and so much a part of Buck's work. So you see woodworking tools, you see dowels, you also see history, references to the history of abstract sculpture here. And so it seems to be, and there's also this sort of hanging head, hanging profile here. So, and the circle that surrounds the whole thing, to me, reads very much like that Leonardo da Vinci kind of perfect proportion drawing, that's attempting to find the perfect proportion of the human body. And so it's very much about kind of art and a rumination on what he does as an artist. There are also a number of sculptures that kind of, in a way, I relate them to the 18th century notion of the cabinet of curiosities, the Wunderkammer, the people, sort of the precedent to the museum. Before there were museums, there were these just collections which were not, particularly well curated, just natural and man-made objects thrown together. And so here, this has a kind of Wunderkammer quality. But again, it uses many of the images that we have seen also in the woodcuts, particularly the scrimshaw, from which this one gets its name. You see that the ship that is on the whale tooth. But then there are all these other kind of images of America, the map of America. There's the hand with the flame, which here seems to be a kind of message of hope. There, I think the turkey is kind of a great image there, because of course it's a kind of reminder that we've seen so many eagles in the work, but that the original idea of Benjamin Franklin was that the national bird should be the turkey, not the eagle, the militaristic eagle. And I do sometimes wonder what a different country this might have been if we had adopted the wild turkey instead. Another one of these kind of Wunderkammer images here. Again, you can see many of the images that we've glimpsed already in the woodcuts. There again is the potato argosy, the Taj Mahal. We've seen some of the architectural images, and here the Taj Mahal is being kind of balanced with the Guggenheim Museum. So again, there's this kind of east-west notion. And there's the globes, again, the globe with America, globe without America. So it seems to be, again, a kind of commentary or an inventory in a way of the kinds, many of these sort of symbols that have to do with the notion of globalism. Now, what I want to do in closing here is to talk about three works which are not in the exhibition, which are kind of a more recent and very elaborate, and which suggest kind of the way in which Buck has melded the kind of much more political commentaries that we find in the woodcuts with the sculptures to create these very elaborate moving sculptures. These are kinetic, and they're kind of based in many ways of these kind of early American whirligig so you turn these toys that were made again by woodworkers, and these all move, but unfortunately we have to look at them here as a single slide. So for example, this one, Cat's Cradle, just to sort of quickly, they're very elaborate, but just to quickly give you some of the things that are here. This is the work which is dedicated to the notion of the discovery of America. So you have like this square geometric cube, which of course refers to the fact that the world was once thought to be flat. It's balancing on a mission church, which talks about kind of the kind of discovery, the age of exploration. In front of it is a perpetually rocking cradle with a model of the United States. And this seems to be, again, talking about the birth of America. It's full of bones, so perhaps referring to the fact that the birth of our nation came at the expense of indigenous lives. On the right, you see, and this would be twirling around, is a kind of little whirligig of prominent explorers, among them Columbus, Vespucci, Ponce de Leon, Magellan, the people who discovered, so-called, our country. And of course, on the other side then is a boatman who is deliberately referencing the idea of Herron, the Greek mythological figure who ferried bodies to the land of the dead. So there's a kind of discovery and yet sort of death image as well. There is a priest down here who's wielding crosses which circle, which constantly move. And so the work seems to be about the dark side of the age of exploration, and perhaps suggesting that exploration, it was also an age of exploitation. And so it's again a kind of much more it's comical, but I think a much more pointed commentary again on this idea of what does it mean to be America. And again, another one here, State of the Union, which is here again, it's something moving, a moving piece. It's a wagon that's driven by bats. You see them on the right, and fueled on the other side by whirling dollar bills. And again, we have some images like a burning church. We have in the central image men with weapons who are chopping down a tree, which is its leaves have become symbols of American democracy. And there's a banner in front that says free for all, which of course has a double meaning. Free for all, on the one hand, suggests our American freedoms. On the other hand, it also suggests the kind of chaos that seems to have been engulfing our politics more and more. And finally, this work, The March of Folly, the title of this work comes from a book by Barbara Tuchman, a historian, who was examining various historical turning points in which everything changed, driven by foolish decisions. And here, this is a parade. It's a kind of March of Folly as a parade. And again, you have to imagine things moving here, but it's a parade that's pushed forward by these different little, almost like cars on wheels. On the right is this, military folly here, this bomb. And you see there are figures here of Kim Jong-un, the Korean leader of North Korea, Dennis Rodman, sort of his enabler. In the center is the Trojan horse, which of course was the ultimate military folly brought on by overconfidence. Then we see Trump Tower. We see Trump peeking his head out with his oversized tie. We see Stormy Daniels sort of kicking, the tuba player as he marches forward. And so again, a much more kind of pointed commentary than I think, certainly than the other sculptures, or even I think much more explicit than the woodcuts that we were looking at. So what I want to leave you with is sort of the idea that what I think Buck is trying to do here is to encourage us to question what we think we are as a country, to question whether we are really living up to our ideals, and also to think about, how do we create our own narratives out of the kind of mythologies and the symbols that are so much a part of our identity. And finally, I'd like to leave you with a quote from the novelist Barbara Kingsolver, which seems to be kind of very apropos to the way that Buck thinks about America. And she says, patriotism is tied up here in the US with seeing our country as a perfect finished product, not as a work in progress. And I think she and Buck both encourage us instead to think about ourselves as a work in progress. We are not done. And if we think about and contemplate the worst in us, that will allow us to also think about how we can do our best. So thank you. And let me stop sharing my screen. Okay, there we go. Anyway, and so I think now we are open for questions and answers.
Do we have any questions from the audience to start off, and then we'll look at anything from our remote folks? Anyone out there? Yeah, please. He's going to bring over a microphone. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Is this thing on? This is not so much a question as my name's Steve Mannheimer. I think we met years and years ago through the New Art Examiner, and I'm also from Des Moines.
Oh.
And I just wanted to say hello from Des Moines. You're a couple of years younger than I am, but I remember St. Joseph's Academy.
Indeed.
Right down the street from the Des Moines Arts Center.
Yep.
So thank you. It was a very, very enjoyable talk, and I just wanted to offer my appreciation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's great. And thank you. I wish I could say hello in person.
Thank you. And anyone else? Yeah, we have a question out back.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your lecture, and I do appreciate it. So I see that you care about different issues in the world, like political issues, cultural differences, differences like kind of in some of your works, like talking about sexual stuff. So I want to ask that as an artist, how do you make?
Sorry,
What?
Just one sec.
Sorry. Okay. So as an artist, how do you make the connection between your different fields of interest? You know what I'm saying? Like how do you keep it all connected together?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the things that, you can realize from John Buck's work is that it doesn't have to all be connected. I mean, his work it goes in so many different directions and deals with so many different things. So, I mean, and you know, as a writer, I face the same thing. I mean, you know, I'm writing about art, but I'm writing about many different things. And so I think that as an artist, the thing to do is to, if you pick a subject, to dig deep into it, to not try to say everything all at once. If you know, you care about political issues, don't try to do them all at once, but you know, but to dig deep and try to, you know, try to make sense of one thing deeply and then another thing deeply. And I think that what you'll find then is that sometimes the connections sort of appear and come into being by doing that. So, but I think that Buck is a good, you know, model for this kind of way of thinking about, you know, how do you deal with many different kinds of issues?
Thank you. And do you think that like maybe using the same material or the materials that are kind of connected to each other or close to each other can help an artist to like to kind of like to kind of make a very good, I know that you said that you don't have to make the connection, but like does it help to make the connection kind of, or
Well, I think maybe if you look at the way that John Buck's work, you know, is okay. So he deals with a lot of different kinds of issues, but he uses, like with the woodcuts, less so with the sculptures, but the woodcuts, he has this format, you know, and so in a way that gives him a language to talk about a lot of different things. The format of the big, you know, the woodcut, you know, the big central image, and then the kind of, as I said, sort of, it's like the theme and then the commentary, you know, behind. So in that case, you know, I mean, he has found, you know, he's found, I guess you could say, a language, and within that language, then he can say many different things. And so individual works may not necessarily be connected to each other, but, you know, again, if you go through the show, you know, it's clear that, you know, there are certain symbols that recur. They maybe mean something different in different works, but yeah, I think that you know, if you want to make a kind of to make a statement, well, at least in the way that he's doing it, it is kind of helpful to, you know, you limit certain options so that you are able to, you know, expand others in a way.
thank you. And I
There's
feel
a if you could just hold for a sec. There's some questions from the virtual audience, and we can come back to you in a sec. That I'd like to bring forward. Carrie Deneen is asking, can you speak more about Buck's technique, how he can make these incredible woodcuts?
Yeah, no, I mean, he has really pioneered this amazing technique, because they're very, very big. You know, they are, you know, hugely big. And so he does them in pieces, basically, so that it's almost like fitting together a jigsaw puzzle. And so he has the different pieces, and he draws, you know, or sort of incisors directly on the wood. He uses this very soft wood that allows him, so that it's all, you know, it has a kind of fluidity, and you can see the fluidity of the line inside. And so then he pieces them all together. And then he's able then to run them off on this sort of very large scale. But it's, you know, I mean, it's an interesting process, because it means that, you know, until he's done, he doesn't really see the whole thing as a whole. And so, you know, it's, you know, kind of being very sort of close up as he's doing the drawings, and then, you know, as with a jigsaw puzzle, putting it all together, and then the whole comes clear. So it's an interesting technique. Usually woodcuts are not that big. You know, it's not traditional to make them at that scale.
And I think for those who can come into the gallery, Buck has given us 3 works. It's basically the wood block itself for Phoenix Rising, and a rubbing that he made from it, and then the final print itself. And so you really can kind of dive into how he's doing that by creating these central elements that he pulls out, inks separately, reassembles back in after he's inked the background, and then printed. Now, of course, he works with Bud Shark, Shark's Ink, for quite a few number of years now. And so as I think Eleanor commented, as the years progressed, you'll see a much more sophisticated approach to printmaking, because he's working with a master printmaker who combines Buck's talent and vision with incredible technique too as well. There are a couple other questions here. Holly Day asks, how large are these pictures with all those details?
But they're about, I think, Joseph, they're like 6 feet, right? Pretty much.
Yeah. Some of them are as much as 6 feet or more square. I think there's the big 9-part circle is remind me. I think it's about 8 feet square, if I'm not mistaken. Not all of them are enormous, but most of them are 6 feet or taller in height. Let's take another one here, if we could. Yes, I'm sorry.
Did you say that he was working with a master printmaker as in
He
someone
is.
other than himself?
Yeah, he works with Bud Shark, who is of Sharks Inc. out of Boulder, Colorado. And in fact, I was going to mention tonight, we haven't set the date yet, but there'll be a panel discussion. It'll be a virtual format like this, where that John has agreed to participate in, along with Bud himself, and then locally Dominic Sinibaldi, who heads up Cathead Press here. So stay tuned and keep your eye out for an announcement for that. It'll be sometime during the run of the show. Let's see, if there's anything else. Jennifer Lee has a question. She's one of our professors here at Herron. Excellent talk, thank you. In the final piece you showed, what do you make of the lacoon in the back, on the back of the Trojan horse? As an
That's it.
iconographer-
That's right. That's an interesting image. Yeah. Well, I mean, so much of it seems to be about kind of futility in a way. And, so perhaps, the snakes, the father and the sons being killed by the snakes. It seems to be, to me, it's a kind of another, another sort of image of futility and as some of the other images are as well. But it's very interesting, actually, the way that he draws it, particularly in that last piece, from so many different sources. And actually the last three that I showed, come from many. There's also I think in one of the others, there's the Manifest Destiny. I think it was State of the Union. There's that famous painting of Manifest Destiny, kind of the angel leading, the troops forward, westward. So he's really gone into art history quite a bit, I think, with a lot of these images. So, which is very interesting and a bit different than what he had been doing previously in the sculptures and in the painting, in the woodcuts.
And I know she had kind of a follow-up question that, as an iconographer, would you take this to mean a warning being silenced? Her first, the lacoon on the back of the Trojan horse.
Right. Yeah. Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Any questions from the audience? We have one here from Ardeen.
I want to say thank you again for being here, and a standing invitation to join us in person when that's possible again.
I would
to have
love
your
to.
work. I know I've been peeking into the gallery, and the work is so physical. I'm really looking forward to having that physical interaction with the work, and really sort of intrigued to see how the larger images draw us in, and how the details really hold us, and what we discover and what's revealed as we explore the work. But the last three images you showed, I'm curious about the scale of those, and I'm assuming they're also quite large in scale and quite
Yes,
physical, but-
they're very big. Yeah, you could actually, if you go to YouTube, you can see them in operation. But yes, they're very large. Yeah, it's like he sort of jumped a whole scale with, because the sculptures generally previously were not so big, but yeah, these are kind of real installations actually, and also you can see them moving on YouTube, which is kind of remarkable.
I'm intrigued to see the time component of this. So, but thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Well, I think that wraps up all of our questions. Eleanor, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective on really what I think is one of the great American artists today. And we're so thrilled and happy to have his vision here. And we will talk to you soon.
Well, and thank you very much. I really, and as I said, I'm really sorry I can't be there in person. And I wish we could all have a drink together now, but we can't.
Sounds great. Well, we'll get there at some point. If we
All right,
keep on believing in America and then maybe a new future. Thank
Right.
you so much. Good night.
all right. Bye-bye.